Today, the issue we are going to discuss is in regards with PETA, an NGO, and people know and have read about it. It is People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. That's what the full form is. Now, focus on the word ethics here. So, just recently, the organization got itself involved in a very funny issue, to say. So, in Ahmedabad, a hoarding came up which urged people to think about cow protection by giving up leather around Rakshabandhan. Think about cow protection by giving up leather around Rakshabandhan. Now, I have been celebrating this festival for almost a decade now. A lot of you have been celebrating it for since the day you were born. Perhaps you had an elder sister or someone in the family. We haven't really come across a lot of leather rakhis lately. We've sure come across Chinese plastic ones, but we've never come across leather rakhis. They aren't that prominent. But PETA somehow thought it was. The citizens on the internet, they were not amused, clearly. They actually called out PETA's hypocrisy, which is always prevalent every time a Hindu festival is around. This time it was Rakshabandhan, which falls next week. Often it's Diwali, it's Dashera, and other festivals. So the people had one simple question. When just earlier this month, PETA had put up hoardings in Lucknow urging people to think about the protection of goats just ahead of Bakrid. And then the hoardings were taken down because the Islamic clerics had the problem. Where was the outrage by PETA then? Why didn't PETA speak up then? In an interview to a digital media outlet, PETA said that the hoardings that were removed in Lucknow, which offended certain Islamic clerics, they were not on the orders of PETA, that PETA had not ordered for those hoardings to be removed. But somehow the local vendor or the owner of the hoarding site, they got it removed and so on. Yet PETA remained horribly quiet about the issue. Now compare this with what would have happened if a hoarding which went up in Ahmedabad, where it was about cow protection, leather, and Rakshabandhan, that was removed by the state government or by the local owner. Imagine the outrage that would have followed. So, this is one hypocrisy people pointed out about PETA. But what really happened afterwards was shocking and thoroughly unprofessional, even for an NGO. Now, a lady, Mrs. Shefali Vaidya, she pointed out PETA's hypocrisy. She pointed out some of the tweets made by PETA around certain festivals, and she called out the hypocrisy of the organization openly on Twitter. What Mrs. Vaidya received in return was an immense amount of trolling, not just by PETA, but even from some people on the Congress ecosystem joining their hands together with PETA, so much that they almost ended up calling Mrs. Vaidya a snake, saying that PETA saying that snakes' life matter too, and we are here to protect snakes. That was the level of discourse it went. But the citizens did not stop there, and this is what we're going to discuss. The two aspects. Firstly, the hypocrisy of PETA in the overall scheme of things. What we saw in Ahmedabad and Lucknow, that's just one example. But the overall hypocrisy of PETA, that is very prevalent. And second, a few questions Mrs. Vaidya put forward for PETA, which can be found on her Twitter timeline. We're also going to discuss about those questions. Let's talk about the hypocrisy first. When this entire trolling started, when Mrs. Vaidya was trolled by the PETA and the people around them, netizens came forward, and they came forward very happily to help Mrs. Vaidya, not in the sense that she needed to be defended or she needed support for her point. She was pointing on an obvious hypocrisy that has been very visible for a while now. But people pointed out other instances. For instance, a social media user pointed out that PETA activists were assaulted by a Muslim mob in Bhopal in 2014 for campaigning for people turning vegetarian just ahead of Bakrid. In fact, the police had even registered a case under Section 295A against three PETA activists for outraging the religious sentiments of the Muslim community. Now, one would expect PETA would have spoken up against it. PETA would have registered their protest against such a case filed against its activists. Nothing of that sort happened. That was the first hypocrisy. The second one was about Sonam Kapoor. Now, Sonam Kapoor, we've seen with her tweets the kind of U-turns she makes, which might even put Kejriwal to shame. But PETA, they actually collaborated with Sonam Kapoor and they gave her the title of hottest vegetarian celebrity. And users pointed out that 3 years after you've given her that title, she's openly claiming to have consumed non-vegetarian food. What is then about the title? Was it just a PR stunt? The same thing happened with Shilpa Shetty Kundra, another famous Bollywood actress. She was given a title about which was somehow relevant to the protection of animals. A week later, she was on YouTube on her channel talking about a turkey recipe. Now, this is the hypocrisy of PETA, probably the collaboration with Bollywood actors, and not just Shilpa Shetty or Sonam Kapoor. That's just a few examples to call out. Probably the collaboration with other Bollywood actors, Siddhya Mirza or Richa Chadda. Richa Chadda was also collaborating with PETA, but ironically, she was against the beef ban. Maybe it's just a part of the PR stunt. Maybe it's just part of the lobby and how it operates. And this is what led Mrs. Vaidya, this hypocrisy of PETA, to ask some very, very important questions. The first question Mrs. Vaidya put forward to PETA was in regard to the connection between the hoardings for Rakshabandhan and cow leather trade. She had a very fair question that why do these hoardings do not come up ahead of Bakrid when goat slaughter is so prominent? Why are these hoardings only there every time a Hindu festival is nearby? Just a couple of months from now, we'll get into the Dashera festivities and Diwali will come up, and you'll have again PETA voicing their concerns for animals. But we see nothing of that around Bakrid, and that was Mrs. Vaidya's first question. The second question she asked was that a lot of Hindu and Jain spiritual leaders, they do not even look at non-veg for the entirety of their lives. And yet, PETA wants to collaborate with the likes of Sonam Kapoor or Shilpa Shetty or even the Pope who openly consume non-vegetarian food. So what is PETA trying to do here? Is it just all a PR stunt? Is it just all fancy PR and sugar-coated words in the garb of some activism? What is it really about? And this was a very good question by Mrs. Vaidya, given often Hindus who are accused of not being very mindful of animal rights. They are the ones who actually care most about animal rights. And that was Mrs. Vaidya's second important question. The third question she asked was that PETA had filed PILs against various Indian festivals, like Kambala, for instance. But why has it never challenged the slaughter of goats? Now, if PETA can go to the courts when it comes to festivals like Kambala, it can challenge it on the grounds of animal rights. Why hasn't it ever gone to court to prevent goat slaughter that happens around Bakrid, which happens around Eid? That was the question she asked. And the last question she asked, that PETA trolled her for 2 days saying that snakes' life matter. This is what came from PETA, a verified Twitter handle. They were targeting a woman saying snake lives matter. She said, why can't they give the same kind of mocking or same kind of jibes at Sonam Kapoor, the likes of Sonam Kapoor, who they say are the hottest vegetarian celebrities, promote them as ambassadors of animal rights, and yet the same people, the same Bollywood celebrities, in this case Sonam Kapoor, they carry bags, designer bags, which are made from animal skin, from animal products. Now, these are the questions Mrs. Vaidya raised against PETA. Of course, PETA had no answers because after a while, the trolling had completed its fuel, it had run out, and they had nothing to offer in terms of their answers. But what Mrs. Vaidya has asked actually is a question we all should be asking to PETA, online, offline, anywhere. That why is this selective hypocrisy, selective outrage against Hindu festivals? Where was the link between cows and leathers and Rakshabandhan? And they had a sorry defense in the form that saying, oh, we look at cows as sisters. But in Hinduism, cow has always been treated like a mother. So their defense was also a sham as much as their activism is. And Mrs. Vaidya did well to point this out. But what she received was an organizational trolling, not just by PETA India, but some people who are very closely in the Congress party too. This serves us as another reminder of how certain NGOs, not just PETA, many other NGOs, some run by Bollywood celebrities, they selectively target Hindu customs, Hindu festivals. If you look at the larger picture, this is just another example of how Hindus are deprived of their cultural rights or how their cultural rights are attacked. If temple management or temple control of the state is one aspect, this is also another aspect that we must be very vocal about. We must be discussing a lot more. Well, one can be thankful for Mrs. Vaidya to point out the obvious hypocrisy of PETA, but I think it's time a lot more people did that. And of course, PETA came up with better defenses. Thank you.